You're nothing but worthless omega trash, and everyone knows it." The words hit like claws raking across already scarred skin. Lyra felt them settle into the hollow space in her chest where hope used to live, joining the collection of similar cruelties that had made their home there over the years. She kept her eyes fixed on the stone floor she was scrubbing, watching soapy water swirl around the bristles of her brush as Lady Cassandra's voice echoed off the marble walls of the great hall. She had learned long ago not to flinch. The silver pendant burned against her chest like a brand, hidden beneath layers of rough servant's cloth and bound tight with strips of linen she wound around her torso each morning before dawn. It had been her constant companion for 8 years now, ever since the night her parents died and left her with nothing but whispered warnings and a relic she didn't understand. The necklace was supposed to stay hidden. It was supposed to stay silent. But lately it had been anything but silent. Lyra pressed the scrub brush harder against the floor, feeling the ancient metal sear her skin through the bindings. The pain grounded her, reminded her why she couldn't let anyone see what she carried. The stories her mother had told her in the moments before the fire seemed like fairy tales now, but the terror in her voice had been real enough. "Hide it," her mother had whispered, pressing the burning pendant into Lyra's small hands. "Never let them see what you are. They will kill you for it." "Are you even listening to me, you pathetic creature?" Lyra's wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, a silver shadow that had never been allowed to fully emerge. She could feel it pacing, agitated by the insults and the proximity of the other pack members who gathered in the hall for the morning meal. Her wolf had always been different from the others, restless and powerful in ways that made no sense for a servant. Another secret to bury alongside the necklace. "Forgive me, Lady Cassandra," Lyra murmured, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "I was focused on my work." The pack matron's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Work? As if scrubbing floors requires any sort of concentration from something like you." She stepped closer, her expensive heels clicking against the stone. "Though I suppose even the simplest tasks are challenging when you're as worthless as everyone says." Lyra bit down on her tongue, hard enough to taste blood. The necklace pulsed against her chest, responding to her distress with a heat that made her breath catch. She pressed her free hand against her ribs, trying to muffle the silver fire that wanted to burst free. Not now, not ever. "The mate selection ceremony begins tomorrow," Lady Cassandra continued, her voice carrying across the hall to where other pack members had begun to gather. "Alpha King Kieran arrives today to choose his queen from among our finest noble daughters. I want every surface in this castle gleaming, every corner spotless. Even someone as incompetent as you should be able to manage not to embarrass us in front of royalty." The pendant flared hotter at the mention of the Alpha King's name, and Lyra had to bite back a gasp. This was new. The necklace had always been warm, had always pulsed with some sort of ancient energy she couldn't understand, but it had never reacted to words before, never responded to the mention of specific people. "Of course, Lady Cassandra," Lyra managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I won't disappoint you." "You already have, simply by existing." The matron's smile was cruel. "But I suppose we must work with what we have. Finish this hall and then report to the kitchens. Cook will have additional preparations for you to handle." Lyra nodded without lifting her eyes, waiting until the sharp sound of heels faded before allowing herself to breathe properly again. Around her, the other servants went about their morning duties with practiced efficiency, none of them looking in her direction. She had perfected the art of being invisible, of moving through the world like a ghost that cast no shadow. It was the only way to survive. She returned to her scrubbing with mechanical precision, but her mind wandered to the coming ceremony. Alpha King Kieran was said to be the most powerful wolf in generations, blessed with both incredible strength and tactical brilliance that had united the fractured packs under his rule. The noble families had been positioning their daughters for months, each hoping to secure the ultimate political alliance through marriage to the king. And tomorrow he would choose. The pendant burned hotter, and Lyra pressed her hand against it through her dress, feeling the raised pattern of runes that seemed to shift and change whenever she tried to trace them. Her mother had called it a family heirloom, had spoken of bloodlines and birthrights in those final moments, but Lyra had been too young to understand. All she knew was that the necklace had kept her alive when everything else had been lost, had somehow provided her with the strength to endure years of servitude and cruelty. But it had never burned like this. She finished scrubbing the great hall as the morning sun climbed higher, then gathered her supplies and made her way toward the kitchens. The pendant's heat had settled to a dull burn, manageable but present, like a reminder of secrets she couldn't afford to explore. In the kitchens, Cook barely glanced up from her preparations as she rattled off a list of additional tasks that would keep Lyra busy until well past nightfall. "And mind you don't break anything," Cook added with a sharp look. "The Alpha King's retinue will be expecting perfection, and I won't have some clumsy Omega ruining our reputation." Lyra nodded and threw herself into the work, grateful for tasks that required enough concentration to keep her mind off the strange reactions of the necklace. She peeled vegetables and scrubbed pots, arranged flowers and polished silver, all while keeping the pendant pressed flat against her chest with strips of cloth that grew tighter as the day wore on. But as afternoon approached, whispers began to spread through the castle like wildfire. "He's coming!" The Alpha King's convoy had been spotted on the horizon. Lyra felt the necklace pulse once, twice, then settle into a rhythm that matched her accelerated heartbeat. She pressed her hand against it, feeling silver fire dance beneath her palm, and wondered if her mother's warnings had been prophecy rather than caution. "They will kill you for it." The words echoed in her memory as the pendant burned brighter, as if responding to some approaching presence that made her wolf pace restlessly beneath her skin. Tomorrow would bring the ceremony, the choosing, the political alliance that would shape the future of the kingdom. But tonight something was coming that would change everything, and Lyra wasn't sure she was ready for the truth that burned silver against her heart. The great hall had been transformed into something from legend, with crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across silk banners that bore the crests of every major pack in the kingdom. Lyra stood in the shadows of a side corridor, watching through a crack in the ornate doors as hundreds of witnesses gathered for the ceremony that was supposed to change everything. Noble families filled the elaborately decorated space, their finest gowns and ceremonial armour glittering in the lamplight as they positioned themselves for optimal viewing of the Alpha King's momentous choice. At the front of the hall, a dais had been erected with 2 thrones, one larger, clearly meant for the king, and one slightly smaller, but equally ornate for his chosen queen. Lady Seraphina stood near the dais in a gown of midnight blue that brought out the sapphire depths of her eyes, surrounded by her family and their political allies. She looked radiant, confident, every inch the perfect noble bride who had spent months preparing for this moment. The smile on her lips suggested she had no idea that her carefully laid plans lay in ruins, that the servant girl she had tried to murder was very much alive and about to shatter her world completely. The moonstone crown rested against Lyra's chest like a star fallen to earth, its silver fire muted beneath the rich burgundy gown that Kieran had somehow procured in the 2 hours since her awakening. The dress was simple but elegant, cut to emphasize her natural grace, while allowing the crown's glow to be visible to anyone who looked closely. She felt like an impostor wearing such finery, but the ancient magic flowing through her veins whispered that she was exactly where she belonged. "Ready?" Kieran's voice was soft beside her, and she turned to find him watching her with golden eyes that blazed with love and determination. He was magnificent in his ceremonial armour, dark leather and silver mail that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the power that radiated from every line of his body. The crown of the Alpha Kings rested on his dark hair, a circlet of gold and amber that complemented the warm tones of his skin. but it was the way he looked at her that made her breath catch, as if she were the most precious thing in his world, as if her presence beside him was a miracle he was still learning to believe. "No," she admitted honestly, "but I suppose that doesn't matter anymore." "It matters." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining as golden light met silver fire in the space between their palms. "You don't have to do this, Lyra. We could leave tonight, find somewhere remote where the Crown's power wouldn't draw attention, live quietly as mates rather than rulers." The offer was tempting, more tempting than he probably realized. Part of her still craved the safety of invisibility, the comfort of hiding from responsibilities and expectations that felt too large for someone who had spent 8 years scrubbing floors. But the crown pulsed against her chest with warm approval, and she could feel the presence of all the queens who had worn it before her. Women who had chosen duty over safety, truth over comfort. And let Lady Seraphina's crimes go unpunished? Lyra shook her head. Let her family continue believing they can murder inconvenient people to secure political power? That's not justice, Kieran. That's cowardice disguised as wisdom. His smile was fierce with approval. My queen, even when you're terrified, you choose what's right over what's easy. I learned from watching you. The words slipped out before she could stop them, carrying more honesty than she had intended. 8 years of seeing how you rule, how you make decisions that benefit the kingdom even when they cost you personally. You taught me that true leadership means serving something larger than yourself. You were always meant for this. His free hand cupped her face with infinite tenderness. The crown didn't make you a queen, Lyra. It simply revealed what you always were. A fanfare of trumpets cut through their intimate moment, announcing the beginning of the ceremony that would reshape the kingdom's future. Through the crack in the doors, Lyra could see the assembled nobility rising to their feet as Kieran was expected to make his entrance. "How do you want to do this?" she asked, practical considerations intruding despite the magic that crackled between them. "Together." His smile held the promise of political upheaval and supernatural revelation. "I enter as planned, address the assembly, explain that I've found my true mate. Then you join me on the dais, and we let the crown speak for itself." "And when Lady Seraphina objects, when her family claims the mate bond is fabricated to avoid political obligations?" "Then we show them exactly how real our connection is." Kieran's eyes blazed with golden fire that made her wolf sing with recognition. "The mate bond cannot be faked, Lyra. When we stand together before those witnesses, when they see the power that flows between us, there will be no room for doubt." Another trumpet blast echoed through the hall, more insistent this time. Kieran's entrance was expected now, and any further delay would raise questions they weren't ready to answer. "Give me 5 minutes," he said, releasing her hand with obvious reluctance. "Long enough to explain the situation and prepare them for what they're about to witness." Lyra nodded, pressing back against the corridor wall as Kieran straightened his armour and assumed the mantle of absolute authority that made him the Alpha King. When he strode through the doors into the great hall, the assembled nobility fell silent with the respect due to the most powerful wolf in generations. "Lords and ladies of the realm," his voice carried easily across the vast space, pitched to reach every corner without seeming to strain. "Thank you for gathering to witness this momentous occasion." Through the crack in the doors, Lyra could see Lady Seraphina's confident smile, could hear the rustle of silk gowns as noble families positioned themselves for the best view of what they expected to be a political alliance that would secure their positions for the next generation. "For months you have expected me to choose a queen based on political convenience," Kieran continued, his words carrying undertones that made several people in the crowd shift nervously. "To select a bride who would strengthen existing alliances and maintain the careful balance of power that keeps our kingdom stable." "And rightly so, Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood called out, his voice carrying paternal approval. "Lady Seraphina has proven herself worthy of the crown in every possible way." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall, but Lyra could see tension beginning to build as the nobles processed something in Kieran's tone that suggested their expectations might not be met. "Lady Seraphina is indeed everything a queen should be," Kieran acknowledged, and Lyra saw the woman in question preen with satisfaction. Beautiful, intelligent, well-connected, politically astute. "Then why do you hesitate, Your Majesty?" Lady Seraphina herself called out, her voice carrying just enough concern to seem genuine. "Surely there can be no question about the wisdom of our union." "No question about its political benefits," Kieran agreed, "but considerable question about whether political benefit should be the primary consideration when choosing a mate." The silence that followed was so complete, Lyra could hear her own heartbeat echoing in the corridor. Through the crack in the doors, she could see confusion spreading across noble faces, could sense the shift in the room's atmosphere as people began to realise that the ceremony might not unfold as they expected. "Your Majesty!" Lord Blackwood's voice carried carefully controlled concern. "Surely you're not suggesting that personal preference should override political necessity?" "I'm suggesting that the mate bond supersedes all earthly arrangements." Kieran's words fell into the silence like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled nobility. "I'm suggesting that when a wolf finds his true mate, no political consideration can force him to choose another." Lady Seraphina's face went pale, her confident smile flickering as she processed the implications of his words. "But, Your Majesty, surely you cannot mean—" "I mean exactly what I said." Kieran's voice carried the absolute authority that had united fractured packs under his rule. "I have found my true mate, my destined queen, and she is not among the noble ladies who have been presented for my consideration." Chaos erupted through the hall like wildfire, noble voices rising in confusion and outrage as the carefully negotiated future they had planned crumbled before their eyes. But through it all, Lyra could see Kieran standing calm and unmoving on the dais, golden eyes fixed on the corridor where she waited. "Then where is she?" Lady Seraphina's voice cut through the din with the sharp edge of desperation disguised as curiosity. "This mysterious mate who has captured the Alpha King's heart?" "She is here," Kieran said simply, "and she carries with her proof that some things are more powerful than political convenience." This was her moment, her chance to step out of the shadows and claim a destiny that would reshape the kingdom's future. The crown blazed against her chest with warm encouragement, and she could feel the presence of all the queens who had worn it before her, lending her their strength for what came next. Lyra pushed open the doors and stepped into the great hall. The effect was immediate and dramatic, and conversations died mid-sentence as hundreds of eyes turned toward her, taking in the simple elegance of her gown and the way silver fire danced across her skin like captured moonlight. But it was the crown that stole their attention, blazing against her chest with ancient magic that made the very air shimmer with power. "Impossible," someone whispered, the word carrying clearly in the stunned silence. Lyra walked down the centre aisle, with measured steps, her gaze fixed on Kieran's golden eyes as she approached the dais. Behind her she could hear gasps of recognition, murmurs of disbelief as people began to realise what they were seeing. "The Moonstone Crown!" Oracle Meredith's voice cut through the confusion with reverent awe. "The lost treasure of the extinct royal line." "Extinct!" Lord Blackwood repeated sharply. "The Moonstone bloodline was confirmed dead 8 years ago." "Not dead," Kieran said, as Lyra reached the dais and took her place beside him, hidden, protected, waiting for the moment when truth could no longer be concealed. He took her hand, and the mate bond flared to visible life between them, golden fire meeting silver light in a cascade of recognition that made several nobles step backward in shock. The crown blazed brighter in response, ancient magic recognising its rightful king and confirming what the bond between them proclaimed. "Lords and ladies of the realm," Kieran's voice carried absolute certainty as he faced the assembly with his mate at his side. I present to you Lyra Moonstone, last queen of the lost bloodline, bearer of the ancient crown, and my true mate in all things." The silence that followed was deafening, pregnant with implications that would reshape the political landscape of the entire kingdom. In that silence, Lyra felt the weight of centuries settling on her shoulders, felt the presence of all the queens who had stood where she stood now, choosing truth over safety. She was no longer hiding, no longer invisible, no longer nobody. She was exactly who she was always meant to be. The moonstone crown blazed like a captured star as it reshaped itself before the eyes of every witness in the great hall. Lyra felt the ancient magic responding to her acceptance, to the moment when she finally stopped hiding from what she was and embraced the destiny that had been waiting for her since birth. Silver flames danced across her skin as the crown's delicate metalwork flowed like liquid moonlight, expanding from a necklace into something far more elaborate and unmistakably royal. When the transformation completed, she wore a circlet of silver fire and starlight that seemed to capture the essence of moonbeams and forge them into wearable art. It was beautiful beyond description, terrible in its power, and absolutely authentic in ways that made several of the older nobles gasp with recognition. "The crown of queens," Oracle Meredith breathed from somewhere in the crowd. "I saw it once when I was barely more than a child. Queen Selene wore it during the peace negotiations 40 years ago." Queen Selene, Lyra's grandmother, though she had never known the woman who died before Lyra was born. But as the crown settled into its true form, she could feel the presence of not just her grandmother, but all the queens who had worn it before. Their memories, their strength, their accumulated wisdom flowing through her like silver wine. She was no longer just Lyra Moonstone. She was the culmination of a bloodline that stretched back centuries, the vessel for power that had been building toward this moment for generations. "Impossible!" Lady Seraphina's voice cut through the reverent silence like a blade. "The Moonstone line is extinct. This is some elaborate deception, some magical trickery designed to—" Her words died as Lyra's wolf began to emerge. Not a full shift, but enough to prove beyond doubt what bloodline she carried. Silver fur rippled beneath her skin, visible through the translucent glow that surrounded her, and when she opened her eyes, they blazed with the ancient fire that marked the rarest of all royal lines. Her canines elongated just enough to catch the lamplight, and power rolled off her in waves that made the very air shimmer with otherworldly energy. "The silver wolf," someone whispered from the back of the hall, "the mark of the true Moonstone queens." Lyra heard the words through the rush of transformation, felt her wolf's joy at finally being allowed to show itself after 8 years of forced concealment. This was what she was, what she had always been beneath the layers of servitude and practiced invisibility. Not broken, not worthless, not nobody. Royal. "Challenge her!" Lord Blackwood's voice rang out, sharp with desperation, as he saw his carefully negotiated political alliance crumbling before his eyes. "If she claims the crown by right of blood, then let her prove it by right of combat. Lady Seraphina has trained for years in the warrior arts. Let her face this pretender and expose the lie." The suggestion sent murmurs of agreement through parts of the crowd. Nobles who had too much invested in the original arrangement to accept its dissolution without a fight. But Lyra could see uncertainty in many faces, could sense the way power was shifting as ancient laws reasserted themselves over political convenience. "I accept," Lady Seraphina declared before anyone could object. "If this servant girl believes she can claim a crown through trickery and magical displays, let her defend that claim in honourable combat." The challenge hung in the air like a blade, sharp with implications that went far beyond simple physical confrontation. If Lyra refused, she would be seen as weak, unworthy of the power she claimed to carry. If she accepted and lost, the crown would pass to Seraphina by right of conquest, legitimizing her claim in ways that no political manoeuvring could achieve. But if she won, "The crown accepts," Lyra heard herself say, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before, undertones of silver fire and ancient authority. Let combat determine truth where words have failed. Kieran stepped closer, his presence warm and solid beside her as golden light began to dance around his form. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, his words pitched for her ears alone. "I can refuse the challenge, claim king's privilege to protect my mate, and spend the rest of our reign fighting whispers about my legitimacy." Lyra shook her head, feeling the crown pulse with warm approval at her decision. "No, this ends here, tonight, with truth proved beyond doubt." The great hall erupted into motion as servants rushed to clear space for the ritual combat circle, moving furniture and creating the sacred space where disputes of honour were settled, according to laws older than the kingdom itself. Within minutes, a perfect circle had been marked on the marble floor with salt and silver, the ancient boundaries that would contain whatever powers were unleashed in the coming confrontation. Lady Seraphina shed her ceremonial gown with practised efficiency, revealing leather fighting garb that had been concealed beneath the silken jewels. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years training for exactly this moment, every step calculated to display both strength and deadly competence. "I call upon the earth to witness my claim," she declared as she took her position at the circle's edge. "I am Lady Seraphina Blackwood, daughter of noble blood, trained in the warrior arts, proven in the political arts. I challenge the pretender's right to wear the crown she has stolen." Power flowed around her as she spoke, earthen magic that made the very stones of the castle resonate with her authority. She was formidable, Lyra realised, more dangerous than the servant girl who had spent 8 years scrubbing floors was probably equipped to handle. But she was no longer just a servant girl. Lyra stepped into the circle and felt the crown's power flood through her system like liquid starlight. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries, the accumulated authority of every queen who had worn the silver circlet before her. "I call upon the moon to witness my heritage," she said, and silver fire blazed to life around her form. "I am Lyra Moonstone, last daughter of the lost bloodline, bearer of the ancient crown, rightful queen by blood and magic both. I accept your challenge and call upon the ancestors to guide my hand." The transformation that followed was unlike anything the assembled witnesses had ever seen. Lyra's human form didn't disappear so much as become translucent, overlaid with the silver wolf that had been hidden for so long. She was simultaneously woman and beast, human intelligence guided by lupine instincts, royal authority channeled through predatory grace. Lady Seraphina attacked first, her earth magic lending weight and force to movements that should have been too fast to follow, but Lyra wasn't entirely human anymore, and the crown's power flowed through her like silver lightning, lending speed and strength that matched her opponent's enhanced abilities. They moved around the circle like dancers performing some deadly ballet, magical energies crackling between them as earth power met moonlight magic in displays that painted the hall's walls with shifting shadows. Seraphina fought with the brutal efficiency of someone who had trained for war, but Lyra fought with something more dangerous, the desperate fury of someone who had spent 8 years hiding from her true nature and was finally free to embrace it. The end came suddenly. Seraphina overextended during a particularly aggressive assault, leaving herself open for just a moment. Lyra didn't hesitate, silver fire blazing around her as she moved with inhuman speed to pin her opponent against the circle's boundary. "Yield," she said quietly, her voice carrying harmonics of silver flame and ancient authority. For a moment it seemed like Seraphina might refuse, might choose death over the humiliation of defeat. But then she looked into Lyra's blazing silver eyes and saw something that made her own power wither like flowers before winter frost. Recognition. The kind of bone-deep acknowledgement that couldn't be faked or forced, the way the universe itself bent around those who were meant to rule. "I yield," Seraphina whispered, and the words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that filled the hall. Lyra released her and stepped back, the silver wolf retreating beneath her skin as she resumed fully human form. But the crown continued to blaze against her brow, its light now steady and sure rather than wild with unleashed power. She had proven herself, not just to Lady Seraphina, but to every witness in the hall. The crown was hers by right of blood, right of power, and right of combat. No one could question her legitimacy now. Kieran was beside her in an instant, his arms encircling her as golden light met silver fire in cascades of recognition that made the assembled nobles gasp in wonder. The mate bond blazed between them like a visible manifestation of destiny fulfilled, undeniable proof that their connection was exactly what they claimed it to be. "My queen," he said, loud enough for every witness to hear, "my mate, my equal in all things." "My king," she replied, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones like coming home after a lifetime of exile. "My mate, my destiny." The great hall erupted into sound, some cheering, some protesting, some simply overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. But through it all, Lyra stood beside Kieran, with the crown blazing on her brow and power flowing through her veins like silver wine. She was no longer hiding, no longer invisible, no longer the broken girl who scrubbed floors and dreamed of belonging somewhere. She was Lyra Moonstone, Queen of Silver and Starlight, mate to the Alpha King. She was exactly who she was always meant to be. 3 months had transformed the kingdom in ways that still took Lyra's breath away. She stood on the marble balcony of the royal suite, watching the morning sun paint the castle grounds in shades of gold and silver that seemed to echo the magic flowing between her and Kieran. Below, she could see servants going about their duties with the same efficiency they had always shown, but there was something different now, a lightness in their movements, a sense of hope that hadn't existed during the days when political alliances mattered more than justice. The moonstone crown rested easily against her brow, no longer the burning secret that had tormented her for 8 years, but a comfortable weight that felt as natural as breathing. Silver fire danced along its surface in the morning light, responding to her contentment with gentle warmth that spoke of power fully mastered and wisely used. "Good morning, my queen." Kieran's voice was warm with sleep and satisfaction as his arms encircled her from behind, pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest. Golden light flickered around them both, the mate bond manifesting as visible threads of connection that had become as familiar as their own heartbeats. "Good morning, my king," she replied, leaning into his embrace with the kind of trust she had never thought possible during those dark years of hiding. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," he admitted, pressing a kiss to the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. "Amazing how much easier rest comes when you're not fighting your own nature." She understood exactly what he meant. The months since their public bonding had been challenging in many ways: political restructuring, noble houses adapting to new realities, the delicate work of rebuilding alliances based on mutual respect rather than convenient marriages. But through it all, they had faced each challenge as partners, their combined strength proving more effective than either could have achieved alone. "Any word from the Northern Territories?" she asked, though she could feel through their bond that his mood was too peaceful for serious bad news. "Lord Ashford has accepted the new trade agreements," Kieran said, satisfaction colouring his voice. "Apparently, his daughter's marriage to the Westmarch heir went well enough that he's decided cooperation serves his interests better than continued resistance." Lyra smiled at that. In the months since their coronation, they had worked systematically to offer alternatives to the noble families who had lost political advantage when the arranged marriages fell through. New trade routes, expanded territories, opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than bloodline. It had taken time, but gradually the kingdom was adapting to a new way of doing business. "And Lady Seraphina?" "Still in exile as far as our spies can determine. Lord Blackwood has disowned her publicly, claiming her actions dishonoured their house name. Kieran's voice held no satisfaction in delivering this news, only the grim acceptance of necessary consequences. The assassination attempt sealed her fate, Lyra. Even families who opposed our bonding couldn't overlook attempted murder. Lyra nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions regarding her former rival. Part of her felt pity for the woman who had lost everything in pursuit of a crown that was never meant to be hers. But a larger part remembered the terror of that night in the stables, the moment when she had realised someone wanted her dead simply for existing. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly. Kieran was silent for a moment, and she could feel him considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. None. The political alliance with House Blackwood would have been convenient, but it would have been built on lies and compromise. What we have is real, Lyra. It's challenging, sometimes messy, often complicated, but it's real in ways that matter more than political convenience. She turned in his arms to face him, studying the golden eyes that had first seen her when the rest of the world treated her as invisible. 3 months of ruling together had only deepened the connection between them, the mate bond growing stronger with each shared challenge, each moment of vulnerability, each night spent in each other's arms. "I love you," she said, because the words still felt like miracles on her tongue. After 8 years of believing herself unworthy of affection, the depth of what they shared continued to amaze her. "And I love you," he replied, cupping her face with hands that were gentle despite their strength. "My queen, my mate, my miracle." The kiss that followed was sweet with promise and warm with contentment, golden light meeting silver fire in patterns that had become as familiar as breathing. But beneath the familiar magic, Lyra could sense something new, something that made her pull back with eyes wide with wonder. "Kieran," she whispered, one hand moving instinctively to rest against her still flat abdomen. I know." His smile was radiant with joy and wonder. "I've been able to sense it for 3 days now, waiting for you to realise what was happening." An heir. The thought filled her with emotions too complex to easily name. Joy, terror, hope, responsibility, all tangled together in a knot that made her eyes blur with tears. After everything they had overcome, everything they had built together, the future was offering them something even more precious. "The bloodlines will be united," she said softly, thinking of prophecies and ancient promises. Moonstone silver and royal gold combined in ways that haven't existed for centuries. "Our child will be powerful beyond imagining," Kieran agreed. "But more than that, they'll be loved, wanted, raised to understand that power serves those who cannot protect themselves." Lyra leaned against him, feeling the steady strength that had anchored her through months of transformation, from servant to queen. Around them, the morning light continued to paint the world in shades of gold and silver, and she could feel the gentle pulse of new life beginning beneath her heart. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked after a moment. "The girl who used to scrub floors in the servants' quarters?" "Every day," Kieran said without hesitation. "She was brave beyond measure, that girl. Survived 8 years of hiding, endured cruelty and invisibility, kept hope alive when everything around her suggested she was worthless. She was already a queen, Lyra. The crown just made it visible to everyone else." The words settled into her heart like healing balm, addressing fears she hadn't even realised she still carried. Sometimes she still woke in the night expecting to find herself back in the servants' quarters, convinced that everything good in her life had been an elaborate dream. But Kieran's steady presence always grounded her, reminding her that the love they shared was real, that the power flowing through her veins was her birthright, that she had always been exactly who she was meant to be. "I used to dream about belonging somewhere," she admitted, "about finding a place where I wasn't invisible, where someone would see me and think I was worth protecting." "And now?" She smiled, feeling the crown pulse with warm approval and the mate bond hum with golden contentment. Now I dream about the future we're building, about our child learning to balance power with compassion, about the kingdom we'll leave behind, better than the one we inherited. Those are good dreams, Kieran said softly, the kind worth fighting for. Behind them, the sounds of the waking castle drifted through the open doors, servants preparing for another day, guards changing shifts, the comfortable bustle of a place where people felt secure in their purpose. It was the sound of a kingdom that worked, of a system built on justice rather than political convenience. I should check with Oracle Meredith, Lyra said reluctantly, knowing duty called even on mornings that felt perfect enough to last forever. She's been researching the old texts about pregnancies involving both bloodlines. Later? Kieran said firmly, his arms tightening around her. Right now, you're exactly where you belong. Where she belonged. The words carried weight that went far beyond their simple meaning, addressing the deepest fear that had haunted her through 8 years of servitude. She belonged here, in his arms, wearing the crown that had chosen her, carrying the heir that would unite their bloodlines and continue the dynasty they had built together. She was no longer the invisible girl who scrubbed floors and endured cruelty in silence. She was no longer the frightened child who hid a burning secret against her chest and dreamed of escape. She was Lyra Moonstone, Queen of Silver and Starlight, mate to the Alpha King, carrying the future of the kingdom beneath her heart. She was exactly who she had always been meant to be. The morning sun climbed higher as they stood together on the balcony, golden light meeting silver fire in patterns that spoke of love, triumphant and destiny fulfilled. Around them, the kingdom they had built together hummed with contentment and purpose, while within Lyra's womb, the next generation began its journey toward a world where power served love rather than the other way around. And in the silver fire that danced along the crown's surface, the spirits of all the queens who had worn it before seemed to whisper their approval, their blessing on the woman who had reclaimed not just their bloodline, but their belief in what true royalty could accomplish. The girl who had been nobody was finally, completely, magnificently herself. The air itself seemed to bend when he arrived. Lyra felt it first as a pressure in her chest, a weight that made her wolf whimper and curl into a tight ball beneath her ribs. She was scrubbing the front steps of the castle when the sensation hit her, so sudden and overwhelming that she dropped her brush and gasped. The silver pendant blazed against her skin like a star gone supernova, hot enough that she had to press both hands against her chest to keep from crying out. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The convoy appeared moments later, a line of black carriages flanked by warriors whose wolves paced alongside them in perfect formation. But it wasn't the sight of them that made Lyra's breath catch. It was the feeling, the way the very ground seemed to vibrate with barely contained power, as if the earth itself was acknowledging the presence of something ancient and absolute. Alpha King Kieran. Even from a distance she could feel him like a storm front approaching. The pendant burned hotter with each heartbeat, each breath, until she wondered if the silver fire would burst right through her skin and reveal everything she had spent 8 years hiding. She pressed her palm flat against her chest, feeling the raised runes beneath the layers of cloth, and tried to make herself smaller, more invisible. She had become an expert at disappearing. The lead carriage stopped in the courtyard below, and silence fell like a blade. Even the other servants had frozen in place, their conversations dying mid-sentence as power rolled off the vehicle in waves. Lyra watched from her position on the steps as the door opened and a figure emerged that made her wolf keen with recognition and terror. He was nothing like she had imagined. The stories spoke of Alpha King Kieran as a force of nature, a warrior whose strength had united the warring packs through conquest and diplomacy. But the man who stepped from the carriage moved with a fluid grace that spoke of leashed violence, of power so absolute it didn't need to announce itself. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the afternoon light and eyes the colour of molten gold. When he turned his head to survey the castle grounds, Lyra felt the pendant flare so bright she was certain everyone could see its glow through her dress. But it was his wolf she sensed that made her blood freeze. It was massive, ancient, a creature of shadow and starlight that prowled just beneath his human skin. She could feel its attention like a physical touch, could sense its restless energy as it searched for something it couldn't quite identify. And when those golden eyes swept across the servants gathered to greet him, Lyra felt the exact moment his wolf caught her scent. His head turned sharply in her direction. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and the world narrowed to that single point of contact. The pendant didn't just burn now, it sang, a high silver note that seemed to resonate in her bones. For one terrifying moment she thought he would stride across the courtyard and demand answers she couldn't give. His wolf had gone absolutely still, focused on her with an intensity that made her hands shake. Then Lady Seraphina appeared at his side, and the spell shattered. "Your Majesty," Seraphina's voice carried clearly across the courtyard, smooth as honey and twice as sweet. "Welcome to Crescent Moon territory. I am Lady Seraphina Blackwood, daughter of Lord Commander Blackwood. My family is honoured to host you for the ceremony." Kieran's gaze lingered on Lyra for another heartbeat before he turned to acknowledge Seraphina with a nod that was perfectly polite and completely distant. "Lady Seraphina, your father spoke highly of your hospitality in his correspondence." But even as he spoke to the noble lady, Lyra could feel his attention like a weight against her skin. His wolf was still focused on her, still searching for the source of whatever had caught its interest. The pendant pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, hot enough to make her eyes water. She needed to leave. Now. Lyra gathered her cleaning supplies with hands that trembled only slightly, years of practice helping her maintain the facade of calm efficiency. She kept her eyes down, her movements careful and deliberate, as she backed toward the servants' entrance. Just another invisible Omega, nothing worth the Alpha King's attention, but as she reached the doorway, she made the mistake of looking back. Kieran was watching her retreat with an expression of confusion that bordered on frustration. His hands were clenched at his sides, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his wolf prowled restlessly just beneath the surface. For one impossible moment, she thought she saw his nostrils flare slightly, as if he was trying to catch her scent across the distance. The pendant blazed so hot she bit her tongue to keep from gasping. Then Lady Seraphina placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, and his attention snapped back to her like a rubber band released. "Perhaps you'd like to see your quarters, Your Majesty. The ceremony preparations have been quite extensive, and I'm eager to show you what we've arranged." "Of course." Kieran's voice was perfectly controlled, but Lyra could hear something beneath it, a roughness that spoke of his wolf's agitation. "Lead the way." Lyra fled. She slipped through the servants' entrance and didn't stop moving until she reached the kitchens, where Cook took one look at her pale face and immediately put her to work chopping vegetables. The familiar rhythm of the knife helped steady her breathing, but the pendant continued to burn like a brand against her chest. What was happening to her? The necklace had always been warm, had always carried some sort of energy she couldn't understand, but it had never reacted like this, never responded to a specific person with such violent intensity. She pressed the heel of her palm against it through her dress, feeling the silver fire pulse in time with her heartbeat. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Cook observed, glancing up from her preparation of some elaborate sauce. "You didn't embarrass us in front of His Majesty, did you?" "No, ma'am," Lyra managed. "I stayed out of the way." "Good. Last thing we need is some clumsy Omega drawing the wrong kind of attention." Cook's expression softened slightly. "Though I suppose you can't help what you are. Just keep your head down and do your work, and everything will be fine." Lyra nodded and returned to her chopping, but her mind was spinning. The pendant's reaction to the Alpha King's presence couldn't be coincidence. Her mother's warnings echoed in her memory, stories of bloodlines and birthrights that had seemed like fever dreams in the moments before the fire claimed everything. But what if they hadn't been dreams at all? That night, alone in the tiny chamber she shared with two other servant girls, Lyra carefully unwound the bindings around her torso and examined the pendant for the first time in months. In the dim candlelight, it looked almost ordinary, just an old piece of silver jewellery with intricate knotwork and symbols she couldn't read. But when she touched it with her fingertip, it pulsed with warmth that had nothing to do with her body heat. The raised runes seemed to shift in the flickering light, forming patterns that tugged at something deep in her memory. Her mother's voice, desperate and urgent in those final moments. Hide it, never let them see what you are, they will kill you for it. But what was it exactly? What was she? And why did the pendant burn like starfire whenever the Alpha King was near? Lyra rewound the bindings with careful precision, layering cloth and linen until the pendant was completely concealed against her skin. Tomorrow would bring the welcome feast, where she would be required to serve the noble guests while remaining perfectly invisible. The Alpha King would be there, would be close enough to touch. The pendant pulsed once against her chest, as if responding to the thought. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her wolf paced restlessly beneath her skin, agitated by scents and sensations she couldn't identify. Somewhere in the castle above, the most powerful alpha in generations was settling into his guest quarters, probably unaware that his presence had awakened something that had been sleeping for 8 long years. The ceremony was tomorrow night, the choosing, the political alliance that would reshape the kingdom, but Lyra had the unsettling feeling that fate had other plans entirely. The welcome feast was a glittering display of wealth and power that made Lyra's chest tighten with more than just the pendant's burning presence. She moved between the tables like a shadow, refilling wine goblets and clearing plates while the noble families showcased their daughters before the Alpha King. The great hall had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, with crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across silk tapestries and arrangements of white roses that perfumed the air with their cloying sweetness. But beneath it all, Lyra could feel the undercurrent of desperation, the way each family positioned their eligible daughters in Kieran's line of sight with the subtle precision of chess masters. The pendant was on fire. Every step she took brought fresh waves of silver heat that made her breath catch and her hands shake. She had wound extra bindings around her torso before the feast, layering cloth upon cloth until she could barely breathe. But it wasn't enough. The ancient metal seemed determined to burn through every barrier she placed between it and the world. And worst of all, it was getting brighter. Lyra caught her reflection in the polished surface of a serving tray and bit back a gasp. There was a faint glow emanating from beneath her dress, barely visible, but undeniably there. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the raised runes pulse with each heartbeat, and tried to position herself so that the shadows would hide what she couldn't control. "More wine, Your Majesty?" The voice belonged to Lady Seraphina, who had positioned herself at Kieran's right side like a queen already crowned. She was breathtaking in a gown of midnight blue that brought out the sapphire depths of her eyes, her golden hair arranged in elaborate braids that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. Every inch of her spoke of noble breeding and careful cultivation, from her perfect posture to the way she smiled with just enough warmth to seem genuine without appearing desperate. She was everything Lyra would never be. "Thank you," Kieran replied, his voice carrying easily across the table despite its measured tone. But Lyra could hear the distraction beneath his polite words, could see the way his golden eyes swept the room as if searching for something he couldn't quite identify. Searching for her. The realization hit her like a physical blow, making the pendant flare so bright she was certain everyone in the hall would see it. She ducked her head and moved quickly toward the servants' corridor, desperate to put distance between herself and whatever was happening, but she wasn't fast enough. "You there?" The voice was soft but carried the unmistakable weight of command. Lyra's blood turned to ice as every conversation in the hall seemed to pause, as if the entire gathering held its breath. She turned slowly, keeping her eyes down, and found herself facing the high table where the Alpha King sat surrounded by the kingdom's most powerful families. He was looking directly at her. "Bring the Dornish vintage," Kieran said, his golden eyes never leaving her face. "The bottle from the eastern cellar." It was an impossible request. Lyra had no idea what Dornish vintage he was referring to, had never been trusted with access to the fine wines stored in the eastern cellar. But the way he said it, with that subtle emphasis on the words, made her realise he wasn't really asking for wine at all. He was creating an excuse to get her closer. "Of course, Your Majesty," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel Lady Seraphina's sharp gaze boring into her, could sense the subtle shift in the room's attention as nobles tried to understand why the Alpha King was addressing a servant directly. The walk to the wine cellar felt like a death march. The pendant burned hotter with each step, until she was pressing both hands against her chest to keep from crying out. By the time she reached the cool stone corridors beneath the castle, silver light was bleeding through her dress in thin lines that followed the pattern of the ancient runes. She was going to be discovered. There was no way to hide this much longer. Lyra found the eastern cellar by following Cook's hastily whispered directions, but her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the bottle she selected at random. The Dornish vintage turned out to be a deep red wine with a label she couldn't read, stored in a section of the cellar that smelled of age and secrets. As she lifted it from its resting place, the pendant pulsed once, twice, then settled into a rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. The return journey took an eternity. When she re-entered the great hall, conversations had resumed, but there was a different quality to the atmosphere now, a tension that hadn't been there before. Lady Seraphina was speaking animatedly to Kieran about something related to trade agreements, her laugh musical and perfectly timed, but his attention kept drifting toward the servants' entrance where Lyra had reappeared. She approached the high table with careful steps, hyper-aware of every eye that turned in her direction. The pendant was blazing now, hot enough that she could feel sweat beading along her hairline despite the cool evening air. When she reached Kieran's chair, she kept her gaze fixed firmly on the wine bottle in her hands. "Your vintage, Your Majesty," she murmured, starting to set the bottle on the table beside his goblet. Their fingers brushed as he reached for it. The world exploded into silver fire. The pendant didn't just burn now, it sang, a high crystalline note that seemed to resonate in her bones and make her wolf howl with recognition. For one impossible moment, Lyra felt something snap into place deep in her chest, like a puzzle piece finding its proper home. Golden light met silver in a cascade of sparks that made her gasp and nearly drop the bottle. Kieran's hand closed over hers, steadying both her grip and her suddenly unsteady balance. His skin was warm against hers, calloused from years of sword work, but gentle in its touch. When she looked up involuntarily, she found his golden eyes blazing with something that looked like recognition, like relief, like coming home after a long and difficult journey. "Mate," she heard him whisper, so quietly that only she could hear it. The word hit her like lightning, and the pendant blazed so bright that for one terrifying second, silver light spilled out from beneath her dress like liquid starfire. Several of the nearest nobles turned in their direction, confusion written across their faces as they tried to identify the source of the strange glow. Lyra wrenched her hand free and stumbled backward, the wine bottle clutched against her chest like a shield. The pendant was screaming now, not with sound, but with sensation, hot enough to make tears stream down her cheeks. She could feel everyone's attention on her, could sense Lady Seraphina's sharp inhale of surprise and suspicion. "Forgive me," she gasped, backing toward the servants' entrance with desperate speed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." She turned and ran. Behind her, she could hear the immediate buzz of confused conversations, Lady Seraphina's voice rising above the rest as she tried to redirect attention back to herself. But underneath it all, she could feel Kieran's golden gaze burning into her retreating form, could sense his wolf's desperate urge to follow her into the shadows. Lyra didn't stop running until she reached the kitchens, where she collapsed against the stone wall and pressed both hands against her chest. The pendant was still blazing, still singing that impossible silver song, but now there was something else mixed in with its ancient melody. Something golden and warm and achingly familiar, as if she had been hearing it in her dreams for years without realizing what it was. The mate bond. The words echoed in her memory, spoken in her mother's voice during those final moments before everything burned. She had been too young to understand then, had dismissed it as fever dreams and fairy tales, but now, with the pendant singing against her skin and golden light dancing behind her closed eyelids, she began to realize that her mother's stories might have been warnings after all. Cook found her there an hour later, curled against the wall, with tears streaming down her face and her hands pressed against her chest as if trying to hold her heart together. The pendant had finally cooled to its normal warmth, but Lyra could still feel the echo of that golden touch, still taste the impossible sweetness of recognition on her tongue. "What happened to you, girl?" Cook demanded, but her voice held more concern than anger. "You look like you've seen the devil himself." Lyra wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and tried to find words that wouldn't reveal everything. "I dropped a bottle near the Alpha King's table," she lied. "I was afraid he would be angry." It wasn't entirely untrue, though it was the least dangerous part of what had actually occurred. Cook's expression softened. "Ah, well, these things happen. Did you break it?" "No, ma'am, but I think I embarrassed myself in front of the nobility." "They'll forget all about some clumsy servant by tomorrow," Cook assured her, though her eyes remained concerned. "Go get some rest. The ceremony is tomorrow night, and we'll need all hands working perfectly." Lyra nodded and made her way to the servants' quarters, but sleep was impossible. She lay awake staring at the ceiling while her wolf paced restlessly beneath her skin, agitated by scents and sensations that didn't make sense. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel that golden warmth again, could remember the way Kieran had whispered mate, as if the word had been torn from his soul. Tomorrow would bring the ceremony, the choosing, the moment when the Alpha King would select his queen from among the noble daughters who had been paraded before him like prize cattle. But as Lyra touched the pendant through her nightgown and felt it pulse with warm silver light, she couldn't shake the feeling that fate had already made its choice. And she wasn't sure any of them were ready for the consequences. The herb gardens were shrouded in morning mist when Oracle Meredith found her. Lyra had risen before dawn, unable to bear another moment in the suffocating confines of the servants' quarters, where her dreams had been filled with golden eyes and whispered words that made no sense. She needed air, needed space, needed somewhere to think without the weight of curious stares and whispered speculation. The pendant had settled to its usual warm pulse against her chest, but the memory of its blazing song still echoed in her bones. She was kneeling beside a patch of lavender, letting the familiar scent calm her fractured nerves, when the ancient woman appeared like a spectre from the fog. "You cannot hide what you are much longer, child." Lyra's blood froze. She turned slowly, keeping her hands carefully positioned to conceal any outline of the pendant beneath her rough servant's dress. Oracle Meredith stood at the garden's edge like something from a fever dream, her silver hair flowing loose around her shoulders and her pale eyes fixed with unnerving intensity on Lyra's chest. "I don't know what you mean," Lyra whispered, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. The oracle stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the dew-soaked earth. She was ancient beyond measure, had been serving the Packer's seer and healer since before Lyra was born, but her movements held a fluid grace that spoke of power that transcended physical age. When she reached out one gnarled hand toward Lyra's heart, the pendant blazed to sudden life. "The moonstone crown," Meredith breathed, wonder and terror warring in her voice. After all these years, I had begun to think it was lost forever. Lyra's hands flew to her chest, pressing against the silver fire that burned through layers of cloth and binding. "You're wrong. It's just an old necklace, nothing more. My mother left it to me when she died, but it's not—" "Your mother was Ilara Moonstone, last daughter of the royal line that ruled these lands before the Great War." The oracle's voice cut through Lyra's protests like a blade through silk. "She was my student once, before duty and love forced her into hiding, before they tried to erase her bloodline from history." The words hit Lyra like physical blows, each revelation making the pendant burn hotter against her skin. "That's impossible. My parents were nobody, just pack members who died in a fire. I'm nobody." Meredith's laugh was soft and sad. "Child, you carry the crown of the lost queens against your heart. That necklace has not responded to anyone's touch for 3 centuries, not since the last true Moonstone ruler was murdered in her sleep. It contains the concentrated power of every queen who wore it before you, every woman who ruled with silver fire and moonlight." Lyra shook her head desperately, backing away from the oracle's approaching form. "You're mistaken. I'm just a servant, an omega with no pack, no family, no power. I can't be what you're describing." "The crown only reveals itself to its rightful heir," Meredith continued, following Lyra's retreat with patient steps. "And it only sings its true song when that heir encounters her destined mate. Tell me, child, what happened when the Alpha King touched your hand?" The memory crashed over Lyra like a wave, golden light meeting silver in an explosion of recognition that had nearly brought her to her knees. She pressed both hands against the pendant, feeling it pulse in rhythm with her racing heart, and knew there was no point in denying what the oracle had already seen. "It burned," she whispered. "It sang. I felt something snap into place, like coming home." Meredith's smile was gentle, but tinged with profound sadness. "The mate bond, child, the universe recognizing what was always meant to be. Your mother told me once that the crown would know its king when it found him, that it would sing with silver fire at his touch." Lyra's legs gave out, and she sank to the damp earth beside the lavender patch. The pendant was glowing visibly now, silver light bleeding through her dress in delicate patterns that matched the ancient runes carved into its surface. For the first time in 8 years, she didn't try to hide it. "She made me promise to keep it secret," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "She said they would kill me if they knew what I was, that the bloodline had too many enemies, too much power for the world to allow it to survive." "Your mother was wise to fear," Meredith acknowledged, settling beside Lyra with the careful movements of advanced age. "The Moonstone line was destroyed because their power threatened those who preferred to rule through force rather than the ancient magics, but hiding has kept you alive, child, until now." "What do you mean, until now?" The oracle's pale eyes grew distant, as if seeing futures that hadn't yet come to pass. "The crown has awakened, and with it powers that have slept for 3 centuries. But more than that, it has recognized its mate in the most powerful alpha of this generation. The political implications alone will reshape the kingdom, but the magical consequences—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I don't understand." "When a Moonstone Queen bonds with her true mate, their combined power creates something unprecedented. Silver fire and golden strength, moon magic and sun authority, unified in ways that could either heal the fractured pack system or destroy it entirely." Meredith reached out carefully, her fingertips barely brushing the pendant's glow through Lyra's dress. "The last Moonstone Queen who achieved such a bond ruled for 200 years of peace and prosperity. She was also the one they murdered to prevent her power from growing beyond their ability to control." The implications hit Lyra like a physical blow. You're saying that if anyone discovers what I am, what this is, they will try to kill you before the bond can be completed." The oracle's voice held the weight of absolute certainty. "There are those among the nobility who would rather see the kingdom burn than allow a servant girl with royal blood to claim her birthright, Lady Seraphina's family chief among them." Lyra's blood chilled. Seraphina knows? Not yet, but she senses something, some threat to her carefully laid plans. She has been watching you since the feast, asking questions about your background, your family history. Meredith's expression grew grim. "Your falsified papers will not withstand serious scrutiny, child. The gaps in your story are too obvious to anyone who looks closely." "Then I have to leave." The words tasted like ash in Lyra's mouth, but she forced them out. "Before the ceremony tonight, before anyone else realizes what's happening, I can disappear, find somewhere remote where the Crown's power won't be noticed." "And condemn your mate to a lifetime of incompleteness?" Meredith's voice held gentle reproof. "You felt what happened when he touched you, the recognition that passed between your souls. Do you think he will simply forget, simply choose another when his wolf has claimed you as its own?" The memory of Kieran's golden eyes blazing with recognition made Lyra's chest tighten. She had felt it too, that impossible sense of homecoming, of finding something she hadn't even known she was missing. But the alternative was death, or worse, war. There has to be another way. Perhaps. The oracle was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on something beyond the garden walls. "The ancient laws are clear about mate bonds, especially those involving royal blood. If the connection is publicly acknowledged and the bloodline proven legitimate, no political arrangement can supersede it. But proving your heritage would require revealing the crown, and that would make me a target, would make you the most dangerous person in the kingdom." Meredith's smile held no humour. "Silver calling to gold, moon calling to sun, the lost crown seeking its king. The prophecy your mother used to whisper when she thought no one could hear." A chill ran down Lyra's spine. What prophecy? That the Moonstone line would return when the kingdom needed it most, bonded to an alpha powerful enough to stand against the darkness that gathers at the borders. That silver fire would burn away the corruption that has taken root in the noble houses, and golden strength would unite the fractured packs under a rule based on justice rather than political convenience. "You think Kieran is—" "I think your mate is exactly the king this kingdom has been waiting for, and you are exactly the queen it needs. The question is whether either of you are brave enough to claim what fate has offered." The oracle rose to her feet with fluid grace, her pale eyes holding depths Lyra couldn't fathom. "The ceremony is tonight, child. Lady Seraphina expects to be chosen as queen. Her family expects a political alliance that will secure their power for generations. They will not surrender those expectations willingly." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Meredith smiled, and for a moment she looked less like an ancient oracle and more like the teacher she had once been to Lyra's mother. "Trust in the crown, child. Trust in your mate. And when the moment comes, to choose between hiding and claiming your birthright." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to carry the weight of prophecy. "Remember that you were never meant to be invisible." The oracle melted back into the morning mist as silently as she had appeared, leaving Lyra alone with the blazing pendant and the terrible knowledge of what she truly was. Around her, the herb garden held its breath, as if the very plants sensed that something fundamental had shifted in the world's balance. A moonstone queen, the last of a bloodline thought extinct, carrying a crown that held the power of centuries. And somewhere in the castle above, the Alpha King paced his chambers like a caged wolf, his beast calling for a mate he couldn't claim without destroying everything he had built. Tonight would bring the ceremony, the choosing, the moment when political necessity would collide with supernatural truth. Lyra touched the pendant through her dress, feeling it pulse with warm silver light, and wondered if she was brave enough to step out of the shadows and claim a destiny that might destroy them all. Kieran prowled his chambers like a wolf denied his prey, golden eyes blazing with frustration that bordered on fury. 3 hours of sleep. That was all he had managed since the feast, and even those few moments of rest had been haunted by silver light and the memory of impossibly soft skin beneath his fingertips. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his human skin, clawing at the barriers he had spent years building to contain its more primitive instincts. Mate. The word echoed in his mind like a prayer and a curse combined. He had touched her hand for barely a second, but the recognition had been instant and absolute. Golden fire meeting silver light in a cascade of sensation that had nearly brought him to his knees in front of the entire nobility. For one impossible moment, every political consideration, every carefully negotiated alliance, every duty that bound him to the crown had simply ceased to exist. There was only her, the servant girl with downcast eyes and trembling hands, carrying the scent of moonlight and ancient magic beneath the harsh soap she used to scrub floors. His wolf had been searching for her since the moment he arrived, following threads of connection that defied logic and responsibility in equal measure, and she was nobody. Kieran stopped pacing and pressed his palms against the tall windows that overlooked the castle grounds. Dawn was breaking across the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold that reminded him of the warmth that had flooded his system when their skin touched. Somewhere in the servants' quarters below, she was probably preparing for another day of invisible labour, unaware that her touch had shattered 8 years of careful control. A knock at his door interrupted the self-torture of his thoughts. "Enter," he called, not bothering to turn from the window. "Your Majesty." The voice belonged to Commander Marcus, his most trusted adviser and oldest friend. "Lord Blackwood requests an audience regarding the ceremony preparations." Of course he did. Kieran closed his eyes and tried to summon the political acumen that had helped him unite the fractured pack system through diplomacy rather than conquest. Lady Seraphina's father would want to discuss final details, would expect reassurance that his daughter's position as future queen was secure, except it wasn't. Not anymore. "Tell Lord Blackwood I'll meet with him after the morning meal," Kieran said, his voice carefully controlled. "I need some air first." "Of course, Your Majesty. Should I have the grounds cleared for your run?" The offer was tempting. His wolf was desperate for release, for the chance to hunt through the forest until physical exhaustion drowned out the impossible ache in his chest. But running wouldn't solve the fundamental problem that had taken root in his soul like poison. His fated mate was a servant girl, and tonight he was supposed to publicly choose a noble bride. "No," Kieran said finally. "I'll walk the castle grounds, alone." Marcus hesitated at the door, and Kieran could feel his friend's concerned gaze boring into his shoulders. They had known each other since childhood, had fought together in the border wars that had forged Kieran's reputation and Marcus's loyalty. If anyone could sense the turmoil beneath his controlled facade, it would be Marcus. "Is everything all right, Your Majesty? You seem distracted." Distracted, as if the complete upheaval of everything he thought he knew about his future could be dismissed with such a mild word. Kieran turned from the window, forcing his expression into the mask of calm authority that had become second nature over the years. "Just pre-ceremony nerves," he lied smoothly. "It's not every day a king chooses his queen." Marcus's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced, but he was too well trained to press the issue. "Of course, Your Majesty. I'll inform Lord Blackwood of your schedule." Alone again, Kieran allowed himself a moment of honest desperation. His wolf was going insane, pacing and snarling at the cage of political duty that prevented him from seeking out the girl who had shattered his world with a single touch. He needed to see her again, needed to confirm that what he had felt wasn't some sort of stress-induced hallucination brought on by the pressure of choosing a mate for political rather than personal reasons. But more than that, he needed to understand what she was. The scent that clung to her was unlike anything he had encountered before, layered with hints of silver moonlight and ancient magic that made his wolf whimper with recognition. No ordinary servant carried that kind of power signature, which meant either she was hiding her true nature or someone had hidden it for her. Neither possibility boded well for his sanity. Kieran made his way through the castle with the measured steps of a man who owned everything he surveyed, but his attention was focused entirely on catching some trace of that impossible scent. He found her in the laundry courtyard, hanging linens to dry in the morning sun with movements that spoke of practiced efficiency. She looked up as he approached, and the world narrowed to the moment their eyes met. The recognition was instant, electric, a jolt of connection that made his wolf howl with desperate need. She froze like a deer caught in torchlight, her hands clutching a damp sheet against her chest, as if it could serve as armour against the intensity of his gaze. But beneath her obvious terror, he could see something else, a flicker of the same helpless attraction that was tearing him apart from the inside. "Your Majesty," she whispered, dropping into a curtsy that brought her eyes to the level of his boots. The submissive posture should have satisfied his wolf's dominance, should have established the proper hierarchy between king and servant. Instead, it made something primal snarl in his chest, a possessive rage at seeing his mate bow to anyone, even him. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice rougher than he intended. She obeyed with visible reluctance, lifting her chin until their gazes locked again. This close, he could see that her eyes weren't the simple brown he had assumed from a distance. They were hazel, flecked with gold and silver that seemed to shift in the morning light like molten metal. Beautiful. Impossible. His. "What's your name?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the servant records Marcus had provided. "Lyra, Your Majesty." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but he could hear the tremor in it, could scent the fear and confusion that rolled off her in waves. Lyra. He tested the name on his tongue, found it fitted perfectly, like it had always belonged there. "How long have you worked here?" 8 years, Your Majesty, since I was 12. 8 years. She would have been a child when she arrived, young enough for trauma to explain any gaps in her background, any inconsistencies in her story. But it also meant she had been here, been close, all this time while he had travelled the kingdom, never knowing that his mate was scrubbing floors in some remote pack territory. And before that? Something flickered across her features, too quick to identify, but definitely there. "My parents died in a fire, Your Majesty. The pack took me in out of charity." The words sounded rehearsed, like a story told so many times it had worn smooth around the edges. Kieran's wolf prowled closer to the surface, drawn by the scent of secrets and the way she wouldn't quite meet his eyes when she spoke of her past. "Show me your hands," he said suddenly. She blinked in confusion but obeyed, extending her hands palm up toward him. They were exactly what he expected from 8 years of servant labour, calloused, work roughened, stained with the evidence of endless scrubbing and cleaning. But when he took them gently in his own, the jolt of connection was so intense it made them both gasp. Golden fire met silver light in a burst of recognition that left him dizzy. His wolf stopped pacing and went absolutely still, focused entirely on the impossible rightness of her skin against his. Somewhere beneath the layers of soap and cleaning solutions, he caught that scent again. Moonlight and magic and something so achingly familiar it made his chest tighten with longing he couldn't name. "I'm sorry," she whispered, trying to pull her hands free. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize." The words came out sharper than he intended, and she flinched as if he had struck her. He forced his voice to gentle, his wolf whimpering at her distress. "You have nothing to apologize for." But even as he said it, he could see the truth written in the tense line of her shoulders, the way she held herself as if expecting a blow. She was terrified of him, terrified of what was happening between them, and he couldn't blame her. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in generations, and she was a servant with no pack, no protection, no power to refuse whatever he might demand. Except she did have power. He could feel it humming beneath her skin, silver fire that called to his golden strength like a missing piece of his soul. Whatever she was, wherever she had come from, she was no ordinary Omega. "The ceremony is tonight," he said, releasing her hands with reluctance that made his wolf snarl. "You'll be serving?" "Yes, Your Majesty, in the kitchens." The kitchens, hidden away from the main event where he was supposed to choose Lady Seraphina as his queen, complete the political alliance that would secure peace for the next generation. The thought made his wolf pace with agitation that bordered on fury. "Good," he said, though nothing about the situation was good. "I should go. Duty calls." He turned to leave before he could do something stupid like demand she tell him everything about her past or drag her back to his chambers where he could explore the impossible connection that was tearing him apart. But her voice stopped him at the courtyard's edge. "Your Majesty?" He looked back, found her watching him with an expression of confusion and something that might have been longing. "Yes?" "The lady you're going to choose tonight, she's very beautiful, very perfect for a king." The words hit him like a physical blow, carrying undertones of resignation and loss that made his wolf howl in protest. She thought he was going to choose Seraphina, thought he would complete the political alliance and abandon whatever was building between them. She wasn't wrong. That was exactly what duty demanded, what political necessity required. But looking at her standing in the morning sunlight with silver light dancing in her eyes, Kieran realised that duty and necessity meant nothing compared to the ache in his chest that whispered mate with every heartbeat. "Beauty is common among the nobility," he said carefully. "Perfection is often just another word for emptiness." Something shifted in her expression, hope warring with disbelief. "But the alliance is less important than finding something real." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but he couldn't take it back now, didn't want to. Sometimes what looks perfect on paper crumbles at the first touch of truth. He left her standing in the courtyard before she could respond, before he could see whether his words had kindled hope or terror in those impossible eyes. But as he walked back toward the castle and the political meetings that awaited, his wolf settled into something that felt almost like peace. Tonight would bring the ceremony, the choosing, the moment when he was supposed to secure his kingdom's future through a carefully negotiated marriage. But for the first time since accepting the crown, Kieran found himself wondering if there was more than one way to secure a future, and if he was brave enough to choose truth over convenience. The investigation began before the morning sun had fully risen. Commander Marcus knocked on Kieran's door with a stack of documents that would have been unremarkable under normal circumstances, but the Alpha King's restless energy and pointed questions about servant backgrounds had transformed routine security into something far more urgent. Kieran accepted the papers with hands that were steadier than his heartbeat, his wolf prowling just beneath the surface as he began to read. "Complete background checks on all castle staff," Marcus explained, settling into the chair across from Kieran's desk. "You mentioned security concerns for the ceremony, so I had our people dig deeper than the usual employment records." Security concerns. That was what Kieran had called it when he couldn't bring himself to admit that he was desperately searching for answers about a servant girl whose touch had shattered 8 years of careful control. He flipped through the documents with practiced efficiency, but his attention focused entirely on one name, Lyra Ashford, age 20, orphaned at 12, no family records prior to arrival at Crescent Moon territory. The sparse details were exactly what he expected, and nothing like what he needed. Kieran read the single page twice, his wolf growing increasingly agitated at the glaring gaps in information that any competent forger could have created. "This girl," he said carefully, sliding Lyra's file across the desk. "Her background is unusually thin." Marcus glanced at the document and shrugged. Orphans often have limited records, especially if they lost their families in disasters. Fire, plague, rogue attacks. The paperwork rarely survives along with the children. It was a reasonable explanation, a logical explanation. But Kieran's wolf snarled at the carefully constructed story that felt too convenient, too neat. He had learned to trust his instincts during the border wars, and those same instincts were screaming that Lyra Ashford was hiding something far more significant than a tragic childhood. "She arrived here 8 years ago," Kieran observed, studying the dates on the employment record. That would put her arrival right around the time of the Moonstone Massacre, Marcus finished grimly. "Yes, I noticed the timing as well, but Your Majesty, dozens of orphans were displaced during that period. The destruction of the royal bloodline created chaos throughout the Northern Territories. The Moonstone Massacre." Even now, 8 years later, the name made Kieran's chest tighten with remembered fury. He had been barely 18 when news reached the capital that the last known members of the ancient royal line had been murdered in their sleep, their ancestral home burned to ash. The official investigation had concluded it was a rogue attack, but Kieran had always suspected something more deliberate, more politically motivated. "Any survivors were verified dead," Marcus continued, unaware of the direction of Kieran's thoughts. "The entire bloodline was extinct, their artifacts lost in the fire. There's no connection between some orphaned servant girl and—" "I want deeper background checks," Kieran interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had united fractured packs under his rule. "Not just employment records, family histories, birth certificates, anything that exists." Marcus's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Your Majesty, is there some specific threat you're concerned about? If you suspect this girl of—" "I suspect her of being more than she appears." It wasn't entirely a lie, though it wasn't the complete truth either. "Something about her seems familiar." The word tasted like silver fire on his tongue, like moonlight and ancient magic that made his wolf pace with recognition. Familiar was the wrong word entirely, but it was safer than admitting that her scent carried traces of power that shouldn't exist, that her touch had awakened something in him that felt like coming home after a lifetime of searching. "I'll have our people search the archives," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he thought it was a waste of resources. "But Your Majesty, the ceremony is tonight. Perhaps we should focus on—" "The ceremony." The words felt like ash in Kieran's mouth. In 12 hours he was supposed to stand before the assembled nobility and choose Lady Seraphina as his queen, completing an alliance that would secure peace for the next generation. The political necessity of it was undeniable, the benefits clear and measurable. So why did the thought make his wolf howl with despair? "Lord Blackwood is expecting confirmation of your choice," Marcus reminded him gently. "Lady Seraphina has been preparing for months, and her family has made significant political concessions based on the assumption that she would be selected. I'm aware of the political implications." Kieran's voice came out sharper than he intended, and he saw Marcus's eyes narrow with concern. "I'll make my choice when the time comes." "Of course, Your Majesty, but if you have any doubts about Lady Seraphina's suitability—" "My doubts have nothing to do with her suitability." The admission slipped out before Kieran could stop it, carrying undertones of frustration and longing that made his wolf pace restlessly. "She's everything a queen should be, beautiful, intelligent, well-connected, politically savvy." "But," Marcus prompted when Kieran fell silent. "But she wasn't his mate. But her touch didn't set his soul on fire or make his wolf sing with recognition." But when he looked at her, he felt nothing more than polite appreciation, while a servant girl with downcast eyes and work-roughened hands had nearly brought him to his knees with a single brush of skin against skin. "But nothing," Kieran said finally. "Send word to Lord Blackwood that I'll speak with him before the ceremony, and Marcus, I want those background checks completed as soon as possible." Alone again, Kieran returned to Lyra's file with the intensity of a man searching for salvation. The details were maddeningly sparse. No birth certificate, no family records, no documentation of her life before arriving at Crescent Moon territory as a traumatized 12-year-old. It was exactly the kind of carefully constructed identity that someone might create for a child they needed to hide. His wolf stirred restlessly, drawn by possibilities that his rational mind rejected as fantasy. The Moonstone bloodline was extinct, had been confirmed dead by multiple independent sources. The idea that some lost heir had been living as a servant girl under his nose for 8 years was the stuff of fairy tales, not political reality. But fairy tales didn't explain the silver fire that had blazed between them when they touched, or the way her scent carried traces of ancient magic that made his wolf whimper with recognition. A knock at his door interrupted the spiral of his thoughts, and he looked up to see Lady Seraphina herself standing in his doorway. She was breathtaking as always, dressed in a gown of forest green that brought out the golden highlights in her hair. But the sight of her only made the ache in his chest deepen. "Your Majesty," she said, offering a perfect curtsy that emphasized the elegant line of her throat. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Lady Seraphina?" He rose from his desk, automatically summoning the courtly manners that had been drilled into him since childhood. "What can I do for you?" Her smile was warm and genuine, tinged with the excitement of a woman who believed her future was assured. "I wanted to discuss the ceremony tonight if you have a moment. There are some details about the ritual that I thought we should review." The ritual. The formal mate selection where he would choose his queen before witnesses from every major pack in the kingdom. It was a sacred ceremony, steeped in tradition and political significance, and Lady Seraphina had every right to expect that she would be chosen. "Oh, of course," he said, though the words felt like lead in his mouth. "Please, sit." She settled gracefully into the chair Marcus had vacated, her movements economical and refined. Everything about her spoke of careful breeding and extensive training, from the way she held her hands to the modulated tones of her voice. She would make an excellent queen, would handle the political pressures and social expectations with the skill of someone born to the role. But as she began discussing ceremonial protocols and traditional vows, Kieran found his attention wandering to the window that overlooked the castle grounds. Somewhere below, Lyra was probably scrubbing floors or folding laundry, hidden away in the servants' quarters where she belonged, according to every rule of proper hierarchy. Except his wolf didn't care about hierarchy. His wolf cared about the silver fire that had blazed between them, about the impossible rightness of her skin against his, about the way she had looked at him in the laundry courtyard with eyes that held depths he was only beginning to explore. "Your Majesty?" Lady Seraphina's voice cut through his distraction. "You seem preoccupied. Is everything all right?" He turned back to find her watching him with sharp intelligence that reminded him she was more than just a beautiful ornament. Lady Seraphina had been raised to read people, to navigate political currents and social undercurrents with the skill of a master diplomat. If he wasn't careful, she would sense that his attention was elsewhere and start asking uncomfortable questions. "Forgive me," he said smoothly. "Pre-ceremony nerves, I suppose. It's not every day a king chooses his mate." The word mate tasted like poison when applied to anyone but Lyra, and he saw something flicker across Seraphina's features, surprise perhaps, or concern. She had been expecting him to say queen, not mate, and the slip revealed more about his state of mind than he had intended. "Of course," she said carefully. "Though I hope you know that I'm honoured to be under consideration. My family and I have worked very hard to prove our worth as potential allies. Allies, not mates, not partners, but allies." The political reality of royal marriage laid bare in a single word, and it made Kieran's wolf snarl with frustration. This was what awaited him, a lifetime of political alliances and strategic partnerships, of doing what was best for the kingdom rather than what his soul craved. "Your family has been invaluable," he acknowledged, which was true enough. Lord Blackwood's support has been crucial in maintaining stability in the Eastern Territories. And it will continue to be, Seraphina assured him, leaning forward slightly. A marriage between our houses would create a power base strong enough to weather any crisis, any threat to your rule. Any threat. The words lingered in the air between them, and Kieran wondered if she knew about the investigation he had ordered, about his questions regarding servant backgrounds and missing records. Lady Seraphina was many things, but naive wasn't one of them. "What kind of threats are you anticipating?" he asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Her expression grew thoughtful. "The usual ones, I suppose. Rogue packs testing your authority, nobles who think they deserve more power, the kind of political instability that comes from rapid change." She paused, her gaze sharpening. "Though I've noticed some unusual activity recently. Servants asking questions about things that shouldn't concern them, old records being requested from the archives." Ice formed in Kieran's veins. "What kind of questions?" "Nothing specific, just curious behaviour from people who should know their place." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's probably nothing, but in my experience it's best to address these small irregularities before they become larger problems." The warning was subtle but clear. She knew something was happening, even if she didn't know exactly what. Lady Seraphina had always been observant, had always possessed the political instincts necessary to survive in the complicated world of noble alliances and royal courts, which meant she might have already noticed his interest in a particular servant girl. "I appreciate your vigilance," he said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "Security is always a concern during ceremonial events." "Of course." She rose from her chair with fluid grace, smoothing down her skirts. "I should let you return to your preparations. Tonight will be significant for both of us." Significant, another carefully chosen word that carried layers of meaning. Tonight would determine the direction of his life, the shape of his future, the woman who would share his throne and bear his heirs. But as Lady Seraphina glided from his chambers with the confidence of someone who believed her victory was assured, Kieran's thoughts turned once again to silver fire and impossible connections, to a servant girl whose touch had awakened something in him that felt more real than all the political alliances in the world. The ceremony was 8 hours away, 8 hours to decide between duty and desire, between what his kingdom needed and what his soul craved. 8 hours to choose between the life he had planned and the mate his wolf recognised as home. Lady Seraphina moved through the castle corridors with the predatory grace of a hunter who had caught her prey's scent. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong with the carefully laid plans that should have culminated in her coronation tonight, and she intended to discover exactly what that something was before it could destroy 8 months of meticulous preparation. The Alpha King's distracted behaviour during their meeting had only confirmed what she had been sensing for days. His attention was elsewhere, focused on something or someone that threatened everything she had worked to achieve. Her heels clicked against the marble floors as she made her way toward the servants' quarters, following instincts honed by years of navigating the treacherous waters of noble politics. When a man like Kieran suddenly ordered comprehensive background checks on castle staff, it wasn't about security, it was about secrets. And when those secrets involved servants asking unusual questions and accessing restricted records, they became threats that needed to be eliminated. The servants' common area was nearly empty at this hour, most of the staff busy with final preparations for the evening's ceremony. Seraphina paused in the doorway, scanning the few occupants until her gaze settled on a middle-aged woman she recognised as the head of housekeeping. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, stepping into the room with the authority of someone who expected immediate attention. "I need to speak with you." The woman looked up from her mending with the startled expression of someone unused to receiving direct attention from nobility. "Lady Seraphina, of course. How can I help you?" "I'm conducting a security review before tonight's ceremony," Seraphina explained smoothly, settling into a chair across from the housekeeper. His Majesty has expressed some concerns about staff behaviour, and I wanted to address them personally." It was a reasonable lie, the kind of half-truth that couldn't be easily verified without going directly to the Alpha King himself. Mrs. Caldwell's expression shifted from surprise to concern, exactly the reaction Seraphina had been hoping for. "Concerns about the staff?" Mrs. Caldwell's hand stilled on the shirt she was repairing. "I assure you, Lady Seraphina, our people are completely trustworthy. We've had no incidents, no problems that I'm aware of." "I'm sure most of them are exemplary," Seraphina agreed, leaning forward with conspiratorial intimacy. "But there have been some irregularities, questions being asked about things that shouldn't concern servants, old records being requested from the archives. His Majesty is particularly concerned about newer staff members, those with limited background verification." She watched Mrs. Caldwell's face carefully, looking for any flicker of recognition or understanding. The housekeeper was quiet for a moment, her fingers worrying at a loose thread on the mended shirt. "Well, Mrs. Caldwell said slowly, there is one girl who's been acting strangely lately, Lyra Ashford. She's been with us for 8 years, but recently she seemed different, distracted, and yesterday I caught her in areas where she doesn't usually work, near the guest quarters." Bingo! Seraphina kept her expression neutral, despite the surge of satisfaction that ran through her veins. "Tell me about this Lyra." "She's an orphan, came to us when she was just 12. Quiet girl, good worker, never caused any trouble before." Mrs. Caldwell's brow furrowed. "But lately she's been jumpy, nervous, and there was something odd at the feast night before last. She was serving wine when she nearly dropped a bottle right in front of His Majesty. Seemed almost frightened by his presence." Or aroused by it, Seraphina thought grimly. She had noticed the way the Alpha King's attention had sharpened when the clumsy servant girl had approached their table, had seen something flicker in his golden eyes that she couldn't quite identify, but definitely didn't like. "Where might I find this Lyra now?" she asked casually. "Probably in the laundry courtyard. She's been assigned to washing the linens for tonight's ceremony." Seraphina rose from her chair with fluid grace, already planning her next move. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. You've been very helpful. And remember, this conversation stays between us. Security matters require discretion." The housekeeper nodded eagerly, clearly pleased to have been useful to someone so far above her station. Seraphina left her there and made her way toward the laundry courtyard, her mind racing with possibilities and suspicions that grew darker with each step. She found Lyra exactly where Mrs. Caldwell had predicted, hanging freshly washed linens on lines stretched between stone pillars. The girl was alone, humming softly under her breath as she worked, completely unaware that she was being observed. Seraphina positioned herself in the shadows of an archway and studied her target with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. At first glance, Lyra looked like any other servant. Rough clothing, work-hardened hands, the kind of invisibility that came from years of menial labour. But there was something else, something that tickled at the edges of Seraphina's consciousness like a half-remembered dream. The girl moved with an unconscious grace that seemed oddly familiar, and when she turned her face toward the afternoon sun, the light caught in her hair and revealed auburn highlights that shouldn't have been visible under layers of dust and servant soap. And there was something else, something that made Seraphina's magical sensitivity prickle with unease. Power, faint but unmistakable, humming beneath the girl's skin, like a song pitched too low to hear but too strong to ignore. Seraphina had been trained from childhood to recognize magical signatures, to identify threats and opportunities among the complex web of supernatural politics that governed their world. What she was sensing from this servant girl shouldn't exist, not in someone with no training, no noble blood, no access to the kind of education that awakened dormant abilities, unless she wasn't really a servant at all. The thought hit Seraphina like a physical blow, making her press back against the stone archway as pieces began falling into place with terrifying clarity. An orphan who arrived 8 years ago with no verifiable background, Unusual behaviour around the Alpha King, power signatures that didn't match her supposed station, and most damning of all, the timing. 8 years ago, during the chaos that followed the Moonstone massacre. Impossible, Seraphina whispered, but even as she said it, she knew she was wrong. Not impossible at all, just carefully hidden. Brilliantly concealed behind layers of servitude and practiced invisibility that would have fooled anyone who wasn't specifically looking for signs of deception. But Seraphina had been raised in a world where deception was currency and secrets were weapons. She knew how to look beneath surfaces, how to find truth in the spaces between lies, and the truth standing in front of her, hanging linens in the afternoon sun, was potentially catastrophic. If Lyra was what Seraphina suspected, if she was somehow connected to the extinct Moonstone bloodline, then everything changed. The political alliance that was supposed to be confirmed tonight, the marriage that would secure Seraphina's future as queen, the carefully negotiated balance of power between the major noble houses, all of it could be destroyed by one servant girl with the wrong heritage. But suspicion wasn't proof, and proof was what Seraphina needed before she could act. She stepped out of the shadows with the calculated confidence of someone who belonged everywhere she chose to go. Lyra, isn't it? The girl spun toward her voice, nearly dropping the sheet she was hanging, and Seraphina saw her first clear look at those unusual eyes. Hazel, flecked with gold and silver that shifted in the light like moonstone, like the lost royal house whose bloodline was supposed to be extinct. "Lady Seraphina," Lyra stammered, dropping into a hasty curtsy that brought her gaze to the level of Seraphina's expensive shoes. "I didn't know you were there." "Obviously not." Seraphina circled her slowly, studying the girl's profile from different angles, looking for resemblances that might confirm her growing suspicions. "Mrs. Caldwell tells me you've been working here for 8 years. "Yes, my lady." "That's quite a long time for someone so young. You must have started when you were barely more than a child." "I was 12, my lady, after my parents died." The same rehearsed story, delivered with the same careful neutrality. But this close, Seraphina could see the tension in the girl's shoulders, could scent the fear that rolled off her in waves. Fear of discovery, perhaps. Fear of questions that might expose truths she had spent years hiding. "How did they die?" Seraphina asked, letting casual curiosity mask the intensity of her interest. "A fire, my lady. Our cottage burned down with them inside." "How terrible! And no other family to take you in?" "No, my lady. The pack here was kind enough to offer me work." Lies, all of it lies, but delivered with the kind of practiced smoothness that came from years of repetition. Seraphina stepped closer, letting her magical senses explore the edges of whatever power signature Lyra was carrying. "You have unusual eyes," she observed, watching for any reaction. "Almost like they have silver flecks, very distinctive." Lyra's hands clenched in the fabric of her skirt, and Seraphina caught a flicker of something. Fear, definitely, but something else. Something that might have been recognition. "I don't know, my lady. I don't really look at myself much." Another lie, but this one carried undertones of desperation that made Seraphina's pulse quicken with anticipation. She was close now, close enough to sense whatever the girl was hiding beneath layers of servitude and practice deference. "Show me your hands," Seraphina commanded, using the authority that came from years of expecting immediate obedience. Lyra hesitated for just a moment too long before extending her hands palm up. They showed exactly what 8 years of servant work should have produced: calluses, stains, the kind of damage that came from endless scrubbing and cleaning. But when Seraphina took them in her own, she felt the same jolt of power that had made her magical senses prickle. Stronger now, much stronger. And underneath it all, carried on a current too subtle for most people to detect, was the unmistakable signature of ancient magic. The kind of power that belonged to bloodlines thought extinct, to royal houses whose artifacts had been lost in flames, and whose heirs had supposedly died 8 years ago. "Oh, interesting," Seraphina murmured, studying Lyra's face for any sign of understanding. "You're not what you appear to be, are you?" Terror flashed across the girl's features, so quick and intense that Seraphina knew she had guessed correctly. Lyra tried to pull her hands free, but Seraphina's grip tightened, holding her in place while she processed the implications of her discovery. A Moonstone survivor, hidden in plain sight, disguised as a servant, carrying Goddess knew what kind of power in her veins. And based on the Alpha King's sudden interest in servant backgrounds and comprehensive security checks, she wasn't the only one who had begun to suspect. "Please," Lyra whispered, her voice breaking on the word. "I don't know what you think I am, but you're wrong. I'm nobody, just a servant." "Nobody," Seraphina repeated, tasting the lie on her tongue. "Is that what they told you? That you were nobody? That you should hide, stay invisible, never let anyone see what you really are?" The colour drained from Lyra's face, and Seraphina knew she had struck home. Years of careful concealment, shattered by someone who knew what to look for and had the magical sensitivity to recognise truth beneath layers of deception. "I have to go," Lyra said desperately, finally wrenching her hands free from Seraphina's grasp. "Cook will be looking for me, and there's still so much to prepare for tonight." "Yes," Seraphina agreed softly, watching the girl back toward the servants' entrance with the desperation of cornered prey. "Tonight, when the Alpha King chooses his queen and secures the future of the kingdom." She let Lyra flee, watching her disappear into the shadows of the castle interior. There was no need to pursue her now, no need to press for confirmation of what Seraphina already knew in her bones. The girl was exactly what she appeared to be, the last heir of a bloodline that should have died 8 years ago, hidden among the servants like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And tonight, unless Seraphina acted quickly, that hidden wolf might destroy everything she had worked to achieve. But she had resources at her disposal, connections that reached into every corner of the kingdom's noble houses. The Moonstone line had enemies as well as allies, people who had benefited from their extinction and would be more than willing to ensure it remained permanent. The ceremony was 6 hours away, 6 hours to arrange what needed to be arranged, to ensure that certain threats were eliminated before they could destabilize the careful balance of power that kept the kingdom functioning. Seraphina smiled as she made her way back toward the castle proper, her mind already spinning with plans and possibilities. The Alpha King might be having second thoughts about his political obligations, but sometimes kings needed to be protected from their own impulses, even if they never realized who was doing the protecting. Death came disguised as kindness in the form of spiced wine, delivered by trembling hands. Lyra looked up from the vegetables she was chopping to see a young kitchen maid standing beside her workstation with a goblet of deep red liquid that steamed gently in the cool evening air. The girl couldn't have been more than 16, with nervous eyes and the kind of pale complexion that suggested she rarely ventured outside the castle walls. "For you," the maid whispered, setting the goblet down beside Lyra's cutting board. "Cook said you've been working so hard preparing for the ceremony, you deserved a treat." The wine smelled of cinnamon and cloves, expensive spices that wouldn't normally be wasted on servant refreshments. Lyra's wolf stirred uneasily beneath her skin, some primitive instinct warning her that something was wrong, but the explanation seemed reasonable enough. Cook had been pushing everyone harder than usual as they prepared for the most important ceremonial feast in decades. "That's very kind," Lyra said, though she made no move to reach for the goblet. "But I should finish this first. The ceremony starts in 3 hours." The maid's smile flickered with what might have been disappointment. "Cook said to make sure you drank it while it was still warm. She said the spices lose their effect if it cools too much." A chill ran down Lyra's spine that had nothing to do with the evening breeze filtering through the kitchen windows. Her wolf had gone absolutely still, focused entirely on the goblet with an intensity that made her hands tremble as she set down her knife. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. "Please tell Cook I appreciate the gesture," Lyra said carefully, "but I really should." The pendant blazed against her chest like molten silver, so sudden and intense that she gasped and pressed both hands against her ribs. The ancient metal was burning through layers of cloth and binding, responding to some threat she couldn't identify, but her wolf could sense with crystal clarity. Poison. The knowledge hit her like a physical blow, carried on currents of silver fire that made her vision blur with tears. The wine wasn't a kindness at all. It was an execution disguised as generosity, carefully crafted to remove a threat that someone had finally identified. "I have to go," she whispered, backing away from the workstation and the deadly goblet that gleamed like liquid garnets in the lamplight. "Tell Cook I'm sorry, but I remembered something urgent I need to do." The maid's expression shifted from nervous friendliness to something much colder. "She won't be pleased. She specifically wanted you to drink it before the ceremony." Before the ceremony. Before Lyra could be anywhere near the Alpha King when he made his choice. Before whatever was building between them could disrupt the political alliance that so many people had worked to arrange. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. Lyra turned and fled before the girl could say anything else, but she had barely made it out of the kitchens when she heard footsteps following her into the corridor. Heavy boots that belonged to men rather than kitchen maids, moving with the purposeful stride of people who had been given orders and intended to carry them out. Her wolf exploded into frantic motion beneath her skin, lending speed and agility to her desperate flight through the servants' passages that honeycombed the castle walls. Behind her, she could hear voices calling out, coordinating a search that sounded far too organized to be coincidence. They had been waiting for her to refuse the wine, had been prepared for the possibility that she might recognize the trap before it could spring, the stables. If she could make it to the stables, she might be able to hide among the horses until whatever this was had passed. Animals had always been comfortable around her, drawn by something she carried that they recognized even when she didn't understand it herself. But as she stumbled into the stable yard with her heart hammering against her ribs and the pendant singing with silver fire, she realized she had made a terrible mistake. They were already there. 3 men in dark clothing that marked them as hired muscle rather than castle guards, positioned to block any escape routes, while a 4th figure stepped out of the shadows with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to orchestrating violence from a safe distance. "Lady Seraphina said you might be difficult," the leader said conversationally, drawing a blade that gleamed with an oily sheen Lyra recognized as poison. She was hoping the wine would make this easier for everyone involved. Lady Seraphina. The name hit her like ice water, washing away the last of her confusion about what was happening and why. The future queen had discovered her secret somehow, had recognized the threat that Lyra represented to her carefully laid plans. "I don't know what she told you," Lyra said desperately, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender that fooled no one. "But you're making a mistake. I'm nobody, just a servant. I pose no threat to anyone." The man's smile was utterly without warmth. "That's not what our employer believes. She seems to think you're carrying something that doesn't belong to you, something that should have burned with the rest of your bloodline 8 years ago." They knew. Somehow, despite 8 years of perfect concealment, despite every precaution her parents had died to put in place, they knew exactly what she was and what she carried. "I don't understand," she tried one last time, but even as she spoke the pendant was blazing against her chest with enough heat to make her gasp. "No need to understand," the leader replied, gesturing to his companions with casual authority. "Just need to die quietly and let the kingdom get on with more important business." They closed in with the coordinated movement of professionals who had done this before, blades gleaming in the lamplight as they prepared to end 8 years of careful hiding with swift, brutal efficiency. Lyra backed against the stable wall with nowhere left to run, her wolf howling with desperation and fury at being cornered like prey. The pendant was on fire now, silver flames that felt like they were eating through her skin, and with the heat came something else. something that had been sleeping for 8 years, waiting for the moment when hiding was no longer possible. Power. Ancient, terrible, magnificent power that roared through her veins like liquid starlight and made the air itself shimmer with silver fire. The first assassin lunged forward with his poisoned blade, and Lyra felt something inside her chest simply snap. The world exploded into silver light. Power erupted from the pendant, like a dam bursting, washing over the stable-yard in waves of moonstone fire that made the air itself sing with ancient magic. The assassins froze in place, their weapons clattering to the ground as silver flames wrapped around them like living things, holding them motionless without causing actual harm. But Lyra barely noticed their paralysis, because the power coursing through her was transforming everything she thought she knew about herself. The pendant was no longer burning against her chest. It was singing, a crystalline note of pure joy that resonated in her bones and made her wolf howl with recognition. This was what she was. This was what she had always been, hidden beneath layers of servitude and practiced invisibility. Not a servant, not an orphan, not nobody. A queen. The last Moonstone Queen, carrying the concentrated power of every woman who had worn the crown before her. The pendant reshaped itself against her chest, silver chains flowing like liquid metal to form something far more elaborate than a simple necklace. When she looked down through the haze of power that surrounded her, she could see intricate metalwork that looked like frozen moonbeams, delicate enough to be beautiful, but strong enough to contain centuries of accumulated magic. "Impossible," she heard someone whisper from the direction of the stable entrance. Lyra turned, still blazing with silver fire, and found Alpha King Kieran standing in the doorway with an expression of wonder and recognition that made her heart stutter in her chest. He had come looking for her, had somehow sensed her distress through whatever connection bound them together, and now he was seeing her as she truly was for the first time. "Your Majesty," she whispered, suddenly aware that she was glowing like a star, that power was radiating from her in visible waves that made the very air shimmer with silver light. "I can explain." "Lyra Moonstone," he said softly, and the name fell from his lips like a prayer answered. "The last queen of the lost bloodline." He knew. Somehow he had figured it out before even she had fully understood what she was carrying. The investigation he had ordered, the questions about servant backgrounds, all of it had been leading to this moment when truth could no longer be hidden behind carefully constructed lies. "The pendant," she said desperately, gesturing to the elaborate crown necklace that blazed against her chest. "It belonged to my mother, to her mother before that. I never understood what it really was until it recognized its mate," Kieran finished, stepping forward despite the power that crackled in the air around her, "until it found the one person in the kingdom strong enough to awaken its dormant magic." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Lyra found herself leaning into his touch as his hand cupped her face with infinite gentleness. The moment their skin connected, golden light blazed to life around him, meeting her silver fire in a cascade of recognition that made them both gasp. The mate bond snapped fully into place, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting to open for centuries. "Mate," she breathed, the word carrying layers of meaning she was only beginning to understand. "Mine," he agreed, pulling her against his chest as power swirled around them in spirals of gold and silver that painted the stable walls with dancing light. "My queen, my mate, my miracle." Behind them, the assassins remained frozen in place by silver fire that held them motionless but unharmed, while the pendant sang against her chest with a joy so pure it made tears stream down her cheeks. She was no longer hiding, no longer invisible, no longer nobody. She was Lyra Moonstone, last queen of the lost bloodline, bonded to an Alpha King whose golden strength complemented her silver fire in ways that would reshape the kingdom's future. And tomorrow the entire world would know exactly what she was. The Alpha King's private chambers had never harboured such dangerous secrets. Kieran carried Lyra through corridors that seemed to shimmer with residual silver fire, her unconscious form cradled against his chest while the crown necklace pulsed with gentle light against her skin. The power surge that had saved her life in the stables had left her drained, her body unable to sustain the sudden awakening of centuries of accumulated magic. But even unconscious, she blazed with an inner luminescence that made his wolf pace with protective urgency. She was magnificent, terrifying, his, and in 3 hours he was supposed to choose Lady Seraphina as his queen. Kieran settled Lyra on his bed with careful reverence, arranging pillows around her slight form while the crown continued to pulse against her chest like a second heartbeat. This close, he could see details that had been obscured by the explosive silver fire in the stables, intricate metalwork that seemed to shift and flow in the lamplight, gemstones that held depths of silver flame, runes that whispered of power older than recorded history, the lost crown of the Moonstone Queens. He had thought it was destroyed with the rest of the royal artefacts 8 years ago, had accepted the official reports that nothing had survived the fire that claimed the last of that ancient bloodline. They had all been wrong. Lyra stirred against the pillows, silver lashes fluttering as consciousness returned in slow stages. When her eyes opened, they blazed with residual magic that made his breath catch in his throat. She was no longer the invisible servant who scrubbed floors and avoided attention. She was exactly what the crown proclaimed her to be, a queen, his queen. "Your Majesty," she whispered, trying to sit up despite the obvious weakness in her limbs. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to see—" "My name," he interrupted gently, settling on the edge of the bed beside her. "Not Your Majesty, not when we're alone. My name is Kieran." The intimacy of it made her eyes widen, silver depths reflecting the lamplight like mirrors. "I shouldn't. It's not proper for someone like me to—" "Someone like you." He reached out to touch the crown that rested against her chest, feeling the warm pulse of ancient magic beneath his fingertips. "Do you know what this is, Lyra?" Her hand covered his, trembling fingers intertwining with his own over the silver metalwork. "Oracle Meredith called it the crown of the lost queens. She said it belonged to my mother, to her mother before that it carries the power of every Moonstone ruler who wore it. And do you know what that makes you?" Fresh tears gathered in her eyes, silver droplets that caught the crown's gentle glow. "It makes me a target. It makes me dangerous to everyone around me. Lady Seraphina tried to have me killed because she knew what I was carrying." The reminder of the assassination attempt made Kieran's wolf snarl with protective fury. The assassins were currently locked in the castle dungeons, their memories carefully probed by the court mage to determine exactly who had hired them and why. But the answers had only confirmed what he already suspected. Lady Seraphina had recognised the threat Lyra represented and moved to eliminate it before the ceremony. "She failed," he said simply. "The crown protected you, awakened the power that was always yours by right." "Power I never asked for." Lyra's voice broke on the words, carrying 8 years of carefully suppressed longing and fear. "Power I don't know how to control. You controlled it perfectly when it mattered." Kieran's free hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away tears that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. "You could have killed those assassins, could have let the silver fire consume them completely. But you held back, showed mercy even in the moment of your awakening. They were just doing what they were paid to do. And you chose compassion over vengeance. That's the mark of a true queen, Lyra. Not the crown you wear, but the choices you make when power is finally in your hands." She leaned into his touch with a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "What happens now? The ceremony is tonight, and you're supposed to choose Lady Seraphina. The political alliance, the stability it would bring." The alliance is built on lies and assassination attempts." His voice carried the cold authority that had united the fractured pack system under his rule. Lady Seraphina showed her true nature when she tried to murder an innocent girl to secure her position. I will not reward such actions with a crown. But the consequences will be managed. Kieran's grip on her hands tightened, golden fire meeting silver light in a cascade of warmth that made them both gasp. "The mate bond supersedes all political arrangements, Lyra. Ancient law is clear on this point. When a true pairing is recognised, no earthly authority can force separation, even when one half of the pair is supposed to be extinct. Especially then." He smiled, watching wonder replace the fear in her silver eyes. "Do you think it's coincidence that the last Moonstone heir found her way to me? That the crown awakened its power in response to our connection? This was always meant to be, Lyra. The prophecy Oracle Meredith spoke of, silver calling to gold, moon calling to sun, the lost crown seeking its king." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on their joined hands where golden light twined with silver fire in patterns that seemed to pulse with their heartbeats. When she spoke, her voice held a strength that hadn't been there before. "If I accept this, if I claim the crown and the power it represents, there will be those who try to destroy us both. The Moonstone line had enemies, Kieran, people who benefited from our extinction and won't welcome our return. Then they'll learn why I'm called the Alpha King," he said simply, "and why the mate of an Alpha King is called a queen." The crown pulsed brighter at his words, silver flames dancing across the surface of the ancient metal as if responding to his declaration. Lyra sucked in a sharp breath, her back arching as power flooded through her system again. But this time the magic felt controlled, purposeful, healing. The exhaustion that had plagued her since the awakening melted away like morning frost, replaced by vitality that made her skin glow and her eyes blaze with silver fire. The crown reshaped itself again, flowing from a necklace into something that looked more like an actual circlet, delicate enough to be beautiful, but substantial enough to proclaim its wearer's royal status. "I can feel them," she whispered, wonder colouring her voice. "All of them. Every queen who wore this crown before me. Their memories, their strength, their knowledge, they're all here, waiting to help me become who I was always meant to be." "And who is that?" Her smile transformed her face, erasing years of practiced invisibility and revealing the fierce intelligence that had always lurked beneath her submissive exterior. "Lyra Moonstone, last queen of the lost bloodline, mate to the Alpha King, your equal in all things." The declaration sent heat rushing through Kieran's veins, his wolf howling with triumph at finally hearing her claim her rightful place. He leaned forward, drawn by a magnetism that felt as inevitable as gravity, and captured her lips in a kiss that tasted of silver moonlight and ancient promises. Power exploded between them, golden fire meeting silver light in a symphony of recognition that made the very air around them shimmer with magic. The mate bond that had been partially formed since their first touch snapped fully into place, binding them together with threads of light that no earthly force could sever. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together as power settled into something warm and permanent in their chests. "The ceremony," Lyra said softly, practical considerations intruding on the moment despite the magic that crackled between them. "Will proceed as planned," Kieran agreed, "but not as anyone expects." "What do you mean?" His smile held the promise of political upheaval and supernatural revelation. "I mean that tonight, before witnesses from every major pack in the kingdom, I'm going to choose my true mate as queen. I'm going to stand before the assembled nobility and declare that the Moonstone bloodline has returned, that the lost crown has found its rightful wearer." Terror and excitement warred in her expression. "They'll never accept it. Lady Seraphina's family, the other noble houses who expect political alliances." will learn to adapt or find themselves excluded from the new order. Kieran's voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had spent years reshaping a kingdom through will and strategic vision. The mate bond cannot be denied, Lyra. When they see us together, when they witness the power that flows between us, they'll understand that this was always inevitable. She was quiet for another moment, silver eyes distant as she processed the implications of stepping out of the shadows and claiming a destiny that would reshape the political landscape of the entire kingdom. "I'm scared," she admitted finally. So am I." The confession surprised him with its honesty. "I've spent 8 years building a kingdom based on political alliances and careful diplomacy. Tonight I'm going to throw all of that aside for something that feels more real than anything I've ever experienced. And if we're wrong, if the kingdom tears itself apart because we chose love over politics..." Kieran's hand found the crown that rested against her chest, feeling the steady pulse of ancient magic that had waited centuries for this moment. "Then we'll rebuild it into something better, something based on truth instead of convenient lies, on genuine partnership instead of political convenience." The crown blazed brighter at his words, silver fire dancing across the surface of the metal, like approval from all the queens who had worn it before. In that light, Lyra looked like exactly what she was, a ruler awakening to her power, a queen preparing to claim her throne, his queen, his mate, his miracle. In 2 hours the ceremony would begin. In 2 hours he would stand before the assembled nobility and choose not the bride they expected, but the mate his soul recognised as home, and the kingdom would never be the same.